Okay, I think that's our cue to start. So hello and welcome to Building Communities from Bedrock Up. We had to get a Minecraft pun in there. So I'm John, I'm from CubeCraft. I sort of own it and run it. And then we've got some other panelists.
Hi, I'm Jeff Pease. I am a community owner for Derpcraft Media, as well as a part of MINECON.org.
I'm Mac, or the T-Guns, and I'm the community manager for CubeCraft Games.
Hi, I'm Luke, also known as Rubik Cube Man, and I'm the lead game developer at CubeCraft Games.
Okay, so out of interest, who here already has a Minecraft server and is looking for advice on how to run a community? If you put your hands up. I'm not telepathic yet. Okay, thank you. And who here doesn't have a Minecraft server but would like to know sort of how communities work in the grander sense? Okay, so about equal. So we'll try and cover both sides of it. So we should probably start in the first place to do with players, because we'll split it up into players, we'll split it into staff, and then we'll do some more miscellaneous stuff at the end. So in terms of players, how do we think is the best way to try and grow that initial community?
So to start an initial community, you need to have like the server itself. That would be pretty bad if you didn't have one and you were trying to grow a server community. But you need to make sure that people know about it. So tell your friends, and you can tell your friends to tell their friends, and you can spread it through word of mouth. You can also put the server onto server lists to try and get it out there and to let people know about it. Then when people are on it, they can tell their friends and spread it like that. So it's just getting people to know about the server and just so that the general world knows that it exists and people will play it. But yeah, that's the start of how to get players.
Anyone else have anything to add? Or?
So I think from the players aspect, I created Derpcraft Media off of a difference, on a server itself. I wasn't the owner of the server. And I think the idea is that a community can be built out of just from a server itself without having to own the server. Pretty much it's just you going out there. And as people come and you start fostering these friendships and relationships, you can create a community that would then, as such a mind, be able to persist and go to any server and still maintain that sense of identity as a community.
Okay, so once you've got that initial community, what would you say is the next steps from that? Is it to try and keep growing that community through things like forums, or is it just trying to keep the people on the server and in that environment?
Well, after you've attracted the players, the most important thing is getting them to stay on your server. And usually for smaller servers, the best thing is having a really personal experience, really friendly. New players join, say hi to them, welcome them to your server. If that initial first impression is really good, they'll be more likely to stay. And if they're more likely to stay, they're more likely to tell their friends, which is a really good way to attract more players through organic growth.
Yeah, I remember this one moment on CubeCraft about 3.5 years ago, which seems like a long time, but it still sticks in my mind, in which this member came on the server, and we all welcomed him, and there was a nice little community of about 10 players online at that time, and we all seemed to welcome him, and he seemed to really like the server. However, about 10 minutes in, he just disconnected, and we were very surprised. And he came back about 30 seconds later, and he said he'd added the server to his server list, which is a moment that really stuck out in my mind, and showed that how you welcome people onto the server is very important, because it makes people come back and want more.
I think since my community is more of a roving community, you need to have a central kind of communications hub, so kind of echoing on the forums. Being able to create, there's heaps of websites or heaps of things that you can easily just create a website off of, or at least forums, and being able to foster the community through everyone knowing what everyone's doing, being able to organize stuff to continue to foster that interpersonal communication with each other and those connections.
So would you say it's more fun to have a community that's based around sort of a general idea rather than a specific server, or Do you find it easier to base it? Like, is it easier to base around a specific server?
So at first, since my community started on a server itself, it was kind of surrounding the interests of the actual, like, the server, the YouTube stuff, all of that. But once you gain that and people switch from the intent of the server, but then just because everyone wants to hang out with each other and you create these friendships, then you start thinking larger and you're not tied to a server, but you're able to then go and figure out, poll your community, and then go out and partake in different games, whether it's mini games or whether it's different games besides Minecraft.
Okay, so once you've got the players, you're keeping them on, what would you say is like the next part after that? So you've got your minimum community, you start keeping in touch with them. What would you say is after that?
To sort of echo what Jeff said about forums and central communication, everyone that plays Minecraft plays at different times. You have people around the world. Not everyone's online at the same time. So having something like forums where your community can kind of grow when people are offline, someone can post something and someone will see it the next day or when they're online next, is really important because you might have a server with only 10, 12, 15 people on at a time, but you might actually be attracting a couple hundred players to achieve that, but they're just playing at different times. So I think having a central forums or communications is probably the most important thing to getting that initial community going, because it's also great for hearing feedback from those players, because you want to know what your community wants, you want to make sure they're happy, and having a central location where they can tell you what they want is very beneficial.
So once you've got those forums, is it worth doing things like, meetups on the server, doing events, so on a specific day you'll all go on and do things, or is it just nice to just leave people to come and go as they please?
I think it depends a lot on the type of server you are. I know some servers, a small server, everyone might know everyone, and it might be very, very active and community-based. A bigger server like CubeCraft, where you've got thousands and thousands of players, not everyone knows everyone, not everyone speaks English even, and you might have kind of smaller communities within the larger community. So I think it very much depends on the type of server.
Okay.
What you want to do.
Yeah. So then as you grow away from that small initial community, so if you end up growing to a community where you've got hundreds of players or thousands of players, how does that change? Obviously, Luke, you've been through this with CubeCraft. How has that changed over the few years in how the community operates and how the community is?
When I started off small, it was very personal. Everyone knew everyone. Someone would join, I would welcome them, and I would get to know them. And I could, someone would log in, I would know who they were. However, as we started approaching about 100 players online at once, this was not possible. I couldn't know everyone, and I was working a lot of the time as well, because I was still at school back in those days. So it was, as it gets bigger, you know less people, but I knew staff that knew loads of people, and those people knew other people on the server. So it was sort of more of a tree of how everyone knows everyone, but not directly. So it was never like I knew everyone, so you get the idea.
Yeah. And you brought up an interesting point there as well with, as the community grows, things like languages start to change. So you get more people who maybe speak different languages, which becomes quite fun. Have you ever had that with the community?
Yeah, I think, the language barrier is always an interesting thing within just a community, just for the fact that you have people who absolutely love playing this game, and they want to be able to share either through Skype or Discord or just private messages or in groups, and they reach those the language barrier and they want to express so much, oh, this is so awesome, but they only get out so much because of the communication issues. The good news, though, is that since this is an online type of game, you can speak minimally, but invest a lot into working together to build something. And I think that overrides the language barrier almost, because there's a physical aspect to it that you can both, benefit from it without having to talk to each other necessarily.
Yeah. So has language barriers been a thing for that you two have noticed within the community, and how did you deal with it?
Yeah, at CubeCraft, we recently decided to take the plan to start translating our games into Spanish and Dutch, because they're two major communities on the server that we wanted to make sure that we were looking after and trying to grow, as well as our English player base, because they're very, very large chunks of the network. And like we have loads of Spanish YouTubers that play on us, and we didn't feel it was right to make sure that everyone was playing in English when they much preferred to talk in their own home language.
Anything from you, Mac, on that?
Well, and as your server grows, a small server, that's not really a huge problem. But with a bigger server with thousands of players, it's very beneficial to have a staff team that's multilingual. Because while we, for example, might not be able to speak with the Spanish players or the Dutch players directly, having staff, moderators, admins who can speak those languages helps create a connection with those players, helps make their voices heard still. So if you do notice that your community is growing into different language groups, it's definitely worth getting people that speak those languages on your team to help make those connections.
Okay, so I think we've probably covered. Is there anything else that people want to add about in terms of players, or should we move on to more of the staff side of it and how moderation of things happens?
I do want to touch on at least the community aspect in the events. I think it's super important to be able to, because Minecraft as such is one aspect of really growing that togetherness and the solidarity. For instance, with Derpcraft, we have, Fridays we have a DJ night where people play music that they like, and we have Saturday, we have like a game night where people get together and we find multiplayer games and we play together. And I think those are crucial for communities that are smaller but can get bigger as well. You just have multiple of these nights, and it really helps tighten people together. So.
Okay, so from the beginning of staff, I mean, you've got players, and that's great, and at the moment there's maybe 1 or 2 people of your close friends, but how do you start to grow that staff team? How do you start to deal with that?
Well, initially, when CubeCraft was small and I knew everyone, there were some certain people that stood out in my mind that were really, really common players, and they played it a lot, and I got to know them quite well. So I would just ask them, do you want to become a staff member and just help me out, help run things when I'm not online, and just make sure that the community's happy, and get rid of people that like hacking and doing things that are breaking the rules. And so I would just talk to people of the community, and I would hire them that way. But I would only do that when CubeCraft was small, as now it's a barrier because we're so big now. I don't get to know people, and I can't just go, do you want staff? Because I don't know people on a much personal level.
Yeah, when you're looking for staff for your server, at least personally, the 2 things I look for in someone are trustworthiness and patience, because you're trusting them to have more responsibility than the average player, and you're trusting them to be able to change and affect other players' experiences and deal with rule breakers and things like that. And they have to be patient because they're dealing with the average players, and players sometimes aren't very fun to deal with. Sometimes they're angry, maybe you've done something wrong, and staff just need to be able to handle that. They need to be able to show that they're the more mature members of your community, the ones who are able to deal with problems on your server and help make it a better place for everyone.
I think when sourcing staff, echoing the first sentiment, especially in a smaller community, you notice people who adapt, who take control, who have sort of like leadership tendencies that you might want to tap into. And that actually can be people who are 18 plus to like younger people who you see it, they just need to kind of hone it and and you work with them one-on-one, and it works especially with smaller communities because you have that the one-to-one time a lot more. But people usually stand out. And then, of course, depending on how large the server is that you're on, there's more people who are more eager, who want to take on responsibility, which is helpful, at least to create a pool of potential. And then you can kind of, speak with them, or kind of just keep an eye on them and see how play, how they integrate with the community to then take the next step for it.
Okay, so once you've got those staff members, how do you keep them motivated to stay part and to keep doing things? Because I assume as a staff member, it can become quite laborious dealing with players who aren't necessarily the most helpful or the happiest. And how important is that? Do you have to do it, or do people automatically just keep doing it?
In my experience, a lot of the people that make good staff members and moderators are people that they enjoy hearing positive feedback from people, so they enjoy helping someone on your server, and the feeling of someone saying thank you or you've made my day, you've been really helpful is usually enough to make them feel it's worth their time. A lot of times it can be worth motivating them with staff games and staff events just for staff to kind of bring the staff team closer together, because that in itself is actually a community within your larger community. And you want to make sure the staff all like each other and work well together, because they kind of set they're the face of your server, really. And you want to make sure that they're happy, because that'll make your players happy.
Do you have anything to add to that, Luke? Or because how did you do it when it was a smaller community? Was it something that you actively paid attention to, or was it something where it just automatically happens that people get thanked and things like that?
When it was smaller, I knew the moderators very well, and they just seemed to they seemed to get on with everyone, and I think they knew the players better than I did half the time. And they just got on and had friendships, and I think they just played because, in a way, they still play like a normal player. So they have the same reasons as well as a normal player to stay as well, with the added benefit that they have control, and they can make people stay, as Max said.
Is that a similar thing for you, or do you do anything special?
So there's a wide variety. First with your staff, just kind of like in real life, if you're thinking company type stuff, always good to like the staff development, like doing stuff together on whether it's doing mini games together and see how you strategize, how do you work together as a team to build up the ability to it keeps them entertained, but it also strengthens kind of the core unit. So that kind of stuff, conflict and stuff is kept to a minimal. And echoing before, it varies on what someone wants to do. Either you have one who wants to like help as well as play, and then there's people who just want to do solely moderating. And so working with those different kinds of people, you ultimately, you just have to play to what they want, that their likes and what they want, and make them feel valued and make them feel as if they are contributing. And that's pretty much how we do it.
Okay, so with staff, how do you work as a group to sort of decide how moderation is going to work? Because at the end of the day, that's what a staff member's there for. It's to make sure the community's heading in the right direction and is upholding things like the rules. So how does that work? Is it just an overview and you go, well, this is how moderation is going to work? Or is it much more of a discussion between everybody within the staff team?
It might be different between different communities, but in my experience, that kind of thing isn't something you just set in stone right away. Your rules and how your team works together will evolve over time. As you grow and you add new members, it'll change organically, and it's just something you kind of have to stay on top of. You know, what the rules a server might have when it's got 20 players can be very different than when it has 20,000 players. Yeah, it evolves and changes from community to community quite a lot.
Yeah.
So
how does it work for a community where it's not just solely on one server? Do you have rules for if you're playing different games, or is it just people naturally just fall out if they're not being a part of that community?
So with my community, it's interesting because, especially with Minecraft, there's always like the server rules that you have, and then we have our standardization, the standards, and they might be more strict or less strict depending on the level of whatever the server is, but we basically come together. There's very workflows and processes that you create, and like for ours, it's kind of like the community organizers, because I break it down between community organizers and in-game coordinators, and the community organizers are the ones who kind of get together with the in-game coordinators to kind of flesh out either the rules or the standards that we need to have, or how we should enforce them. But it's usually, we're more about rehabilitation than about just like fully like kick them out and not have them on anymore, because it's, you're dealing with a wide variety of people, wide variety of ages, some know better, some not know better, and you want to help everyone grow. So that's how we choose to kind of create our rules and then how to enforce them.
Yeah, so is enforcement like a big thing? Like, as you say, is it something where you try to rehabilitate people, or you give them second chances? Or, again, I assume that changes as you grow. Like, in the early days, it's fine to say, okay, you broke the rules once, we'll give you a second chance. And then as you grow, does that change? Or, how does that side of things work? From a staff point of view, I suppose.
When you're smaller, you can afford to tell people you've broken the rules, because, like, I wasn't worried about thousands of other people that are online all at the same time. And if I saw them come back on and they were to repetitively break the rules, I would take note of this, and then they can be like permanently banned and dealt with responsibly. However, on a 20,000 player network, dealing with a single person over a period of many days, telling them that they've broken the rules multiple times, is a lot more work to do at once. So punishments tend to be a lot more severe, because we can't just keep affording like telling them you've broken the rules again and doing it again and again.
Well, I think punishments and rules like that for a community, especially a larger one, are in place because you're trying to make sure it's the best possible experience for all the players and everyone in the community. So someone who's hacking or swearing or breaking the rules is ruining that experience for other players. So that's why players like that need to be punished and need to be potentially banned off your server, because the players who aren't breaking the rules are the ones that deserve the best possible experience. That being said, I think everyone deserves a second chance, so I personally don't believe that anyone should be permanently banned unless it's a very special case. So on CubeCraft, we typically ban someone if they're hacking for a month and give them a chance to come back, and everyone makes a mistake. And then they get banned for a year if they do it again, which I think that's a long time to be banned from playing on your favorite Minecraft server.
And then obviously you sort of try to go down the rehabilitation route, but I assume there are some things that if people do that, yeah, that's sort of...
Yeah, and ours is like complex, because we have many more moving parts. We have the server that you have to work with. You have the server staff. Typically with roving communities, our in-game coordinators / me or whoever would then join server staff in order to kind of smooth out communication. But for us, it's always about context. My huge example is the pesky capital rule, like capitalization. Like, you cannot do all caps, right? And it's just like, it ultimately depends on the context of what something happens, or like, oh, you used a swear word. It's all in like if they found a diamond or whatever, and like, oh my God, it's amazing, and they did it. It's like, yeah, but if they're just like spamming nonstop caps, like, that's a lot different than like in the moment type stuff. So typically you factor in the context in order to help. And with larger, it's all about leveraging your front line, your infantry, if you will, to trust that your staff are going to make those proper decisions and not make it a completely black and white. The people who are actively interacting with those people, letting them trust that they're going to make the right decisions, and then go from there.
So talking about having multiple staff, how does that work when you've got a whole team of people? How do you sort of ensure that each person is being banned for the same thing? Because if one person gets banned for swearing and then some person doesn't, how does that work?
Well, in most cases, it goes back to what I said before with staff having to be trustworthy. You're giving them that extra power, and you're trusting them to make the right decisions to make your server the best it possibly can be. On a larger scale, when it potentially becomes worth it, for example, at CubeCraft, we actually created our own custom punishment system that automatically deals punishments based on what the infraction is. So our staff don't actually have to decide how long someone gets banned or muted for. They just say this person was hacking, and the system says, okay, it's their first offense or it's their second offense. The punishment's automatically applied. There's no variation between staff, and it's consistent across the board. But on a smaller server, usually you have to hope that, or trust that your staff members are good enough people to do the right thing, and if they're not, they shouldn't be staff members.
I suppose you can also write up some kind of small rule book of, well, if someone's done this, you know.
Yeah, guidelines on how to act as a staff member.
Yeah.
You know, they're supposed to take the high road. They're the representatives of your community.
Yeah. And you should also be sharing that sort of information with players, because then they know not to do those certain things. Is that similar for you, or do you just have like big group conversation and just make sure everybody knows what should be happening?
So for ours, the infractions, we kind of solidify it on like like the staff meeting on Friday night type of thing, where we go over a list of topics. I was on a server that had a very complex punishment system that was very like, hey, if it's their, third iteration of this punishment, then do this or do that, and it was just a long list of random infractions. And the problem was that conflict of like, it's happening right now, and it's like being able as staff to take a step back and be able to look, function, like figure out all of this, and then to deal it out instead of making those rush decisions. That and then you have your community that's kind of, if it's already kind of very, I don't want to say hostile, but just very volatile. You're going to have those people who are like egging them on, like, oh, why haven't you done anything yet, and all this, and going back and forth, and then you're just overwhelming the staff with these complex rules. You're like, hold on, I'm going through. It might be page 67 that this is on. And how I see it is with the evolution of rules and being able to legitimately take your rules and always go back and say, is this still pertinent, or through our experience, does this make sense still, based on the consequences that happened after your feedback from your community. Like, definitely take the feedback, and don't think that you're going to be, the beholder of knowledge or the one truth.
So what happens when a staff member breaks the rules? How is there everyone in the room is like, oh, it happens.
It does, unfortunately. And I mean, everyone is only human, and it depends on what type of rule they've broken. Typically, in my experience, they're held to a higher standard and a higher punishment than the average player, because you are trusting them with this extra power and this extra responsibility. And often, if they break a rule badly enough, that means removal from the staff team at the very least. It does depend, and it varies community to community. I've had issues where it's just, you just give them a slap on the wrist and you say, hey, you can't do that, don't do that again. And you've had times where you have to remove them from the community, and you have to do the same thing you do if they were a normal player.
I suppose it also makes it even harder if they were one of your friends who have been with you since the beginning of your community. But I don't think we've ever had that happen. Do you have a similar thing, or does your staff tend to not break rules?
Well, I don't. With the standards, it's again like, in order to alleviate that, you got to start from the source. You got to legitly. For us, since we're a roving community, it's not necessarily tied to the server where there's a physical entity. So for us, it's constantly like evolving how our staff interacts with each other, like interacts with our community members. And if there are any issues, it's always, it's the one-to-one having to speak. It's a lot of hands-on. Smaller communities, you're just doing a lot more hands-on. You might not have as much tech. So a lot of it's manual, nothing's automatic. So when you have staff members that are bucking the trend, or trying to, or exhibiting those kind of like issues, you gotta, it's basically up to, if it was a server, your community manager needs to know. basically need to foster these relationships with your staff, and you need to know what's going on. You can't idly, it's all about being able to, your pool of people, understanding them and being able to know that you're not, that they're not going to do something like that, or if they're completely invested into the process. Because if they're not, then you're gonna know, because you're gonna be, you're already looking. And if something happens like that, unless it's a really freak, random thing, like some midlife crisis that just pops out of nowhere, you're going to need to take a step back and evaluate how you're actively engaging your own customers, which are your staff. So.
Okay. Does anyone else have anything to add about staff or?
I think just the important thing is they are the face of your server. They're what your players interact with on a daily basis. Your players aren't going to be interacting it much, at least on our size, with the people who are really running the server behind the scenes. So having them break the rules potentially illegitimizes other staff who aren't breaking the rules and are doing a good job, because players love to claim they've been banned unfairly or they've been treated unfairly by staff. And you want to be able to trust your staff to be doing the right thing, and as soon as one staff member does the wrong thing, it makes it hard to trust the other staff members when players make claims against them.
Do you have anything else that you want to add to sort of the staff side of things?
So I think the big take home for me with staff is really trust your staff, really be involved. With regard with recruitment, being able to just have that, because you'll be involved, you'll be able to capture those moments where you're like, man, that person's gonna be great, and then work on them, try to get them to join, and especially when you're starting out, rely on people that you can trust, and always just be persistent. And having too much staff, having not enough staff, it's all based upon obviously your population. You don't want to have everyone have op, and you also don't want to have someone or have an unstaffed server. So just be mindful of who they are. Take all feedback into consideration. If it's safe to try it out. You can always go back to whatever you're doing, but always experiment, because that's always helpful with being with always upping your game and trying to improve your server.
So you mean having 20 admins online at the same time as you've only got one player isn't a good idea?
Right. And naming them headist admin, head admin, somewhat head admin, admin, yeah, something ridiculous like that.
Sub-admin to the sub-admin. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so then miscellaneous stuff within communities, you end up, obviously if your community grows, you're going to end up having it in multiple places. So how does that side of things work? Because obviously you've got the core community, they might be on a single server, or in your case, there might be the people who play every week, but then you're going to have more people in the community who might only follow you on Twitter or come in and out of the community. So how does that side of things happen?
I think one of the big things is that there's no set rules or guide to how to run a community. Every community is different. There's big communities, little communities, and even then they're vastly different. And I think it's hard to say what is right and what is wrong for all communities, because it really is something you have to look at your community, you have to gauge what they want, where you're going with it, and what you want the community to be. And that's going to affect how you build it, how you grow it, how you keep it engaged, and what you do with it.
You ultimately have to kind of take a step back, especially with if you got to look at your community, and if it's at that point where they're already developing friendships, they really love what you're doing on Minecraft, like for us, Minecraft, but they are just survival Minecraft, and they want to do Pixelmon, for instance. You are like, well, cool. They're like, I really want to stay in the community, but I want to do Pixelmon a lot more. Like, awesome. Well, let's talk, and we can start growing out the community that way, and then polling your audience and seeing who is more fond of that, and start building out that. And with those multiple, I always think of it kind of from the Greek perspective in college with regards to having colonies and stuff, is really investing having people, especially your staff, people who are like gung-ho, you're thinking you're moderators of your community, and like, hey, do you want to go and kind of spearhead this Pixelmon community for us? Because they're going to be gung-ho about it, they love what we're doing, and they want to expand. And start developing out that for us, building out new standards, taking what's different, what's not different, and what are we trying to aim for? What are your, like, is this going to be adults, 18 plus type of stuff, or it's much more, the rules are more lax, or is it completely different? Is this World of Warcraft? Whatever the case would be, it's just about, as at least the community owner, doing your homework with your community organizers and making sure that you build out your platform, especially since you're already kind of solidified in one, in a group, you'll be able to allocate resources to that and kind of build it out.
Okay. Anyone have any other points or?
Yeah, on the subject of making sure that you have the right content for the community, one thing that I've noticed is that you've got to make sure that what you're supplying your community will work. Now, back in the day when CubeCraft had about like 3 players, we had survival games and parkour. Like, these were 2 things that we had, and the parkour was really, really popular. 3 people popular, because that's all we had. But
3 out of 3, though, so that's 100% of the community is parkour.
It's very big. But this was because the survival games required 24 players to start. So even though it might have been really, really fun to play, we just didn't have the people there to be able to fill the games. So you've got to make sure that what you're giving your community, not only will they enjoy, but it will work. And so you just have to think it through and be, will this work? Will this start? And just aim the content at who you have.
Yeah, because the other thing is, especially if you start to do giveaways and stuff, it's like, 1,000 retweets, and we'll do a giveaway, and like, but if you only have 10 followers, then good luck.
Yeah, it goes back to the whole, it really depends on your community.
Yeah.
A lot of people want to look at their community and they want to do everything their community wants, but you can't appeal to everyone. You can't make everyone happy. There's a reason why there are thousands and thousands of Minecraft servers. If one server could make something that appealed to everyone, there'd be no need for all the other servers. Yeah. So focus on what your community already has, and as Luke said, what makes sense for your community. Don't try and make a game that requires 24 players when you have 10 players. You got to do what makes sense for your community, and you have to keep your community in mind with where you're going with it.
I suppose that's the biggest thing of everything, though, is that the only person who knows how to run your community is you, because it's your community, and you should be listening to your community, and you should be just treating the community as a community. That's sort of how it works. Anything else that anyone wants to bring up, or should we open it for people to ask?
I think one of the big things, and it does vary based on if you're smaller or you're larger, is goals. I think goals are super important, especially if you're starting a server or you want to grow your server to X, if you will. Like, make sure you always are planning, depending, like, I want 10 people on my server. Like, you start out small, then grow and grow. I think it really ultimately depends on your what you want to do, what your end goal is. But goals are always good to have, especially if you want to break out of the personal kind of Minecraft server experience. So,
cool. I think everyone wants to have the 1,000-player server or the 10,000-player server, but you have to focus more on what you have already before you can focus on growing. If you only have 5 players, make sure those 5 players are as happy and content with your server and your experience as they can be, because they'll set an example for new players joining and new community members. If the existing people are happy, new people are more likely to be happy, and it makes it easier to grow. If you try and grow but no one joining is happy, that growth is pointless.
Okay. Are we happy to open it up to questions then? If anybody wants any clarification, if you go over to either of the microphones, that would be great, because otherwise we won't be able to hear you. And everyone else won't be able to hear you. So there's a microphone over there if you head on over to there.
One there as well.
There's one on that side. Feel free.
If you happen to have questions.
If you have a question or want clarification on something that someone else has said.
or just want to say hi.
Yeah, or if you want to say hi. Unless you work for us, in which case you can't say hi.
Remember rules.
You can say hi. That's a rule. You'll get insta-banned from the room.
I have a question about the EULA.
Okay.
Wait 1 second. I have a question about the EULA, the End Users License Agreement, and about the Minecraft, and you know what I mean, the regulations of what you can sell that's pay to win or pay for enhancement, as I would say. Because for new servers, like my server, Komodo PvP, like for it to enlarge and samples advertising, developing things, you would need for donations to keep the server running, right? I mean, if it's a faction server, it's really hard, but if it's like minigames, it's possible because, of course, people would get cosmetics for minigames. Okay. Thank you. People would get cosmetics for minigames more than they would for just factions, because factions is more of you build off of what you have, you know what I mean? What would you recommend for the small servers like that?
So the biggest thing that you've got there is that if you've already got the community and you're trying to monetize that community, you probably have a good idea of what they want. So if you know a lot of people have a faction and they want to have 5 players, then maybe, I don't know if it's EULA compliant, you would have to ask enforcement, but you could have extra slots within that community and decide if that's how you limit things. Or there are many ways that you can monetize things, and it's a whole other panel that we pitched, but we didn't get to do. But it's, yeah, trying to find it, look at other communities that already do something, and then emailing enforcement with your ideas is a great way to make sure that you stay on the right side of the EULA, which is an important thing to do if you want to be able to grow that community and keep growing it and keep growing it and keep growing it.
Also, what do you recommend for advertising the server?
Word of mouth is sort of the biggest thing for us is word of mouth. Like, we started with a really small Dutch community, and then for some reason I think like a whole high school suddenly knew about us, and then 2 high schools knew about us, and then 30,000 people suddenly knew about us, and it's like, okay, now we have a Dutch community, but it's kind of cool. And obviously you've got the server lists, they're good, they're a good place, because people will just go to Google and type in faction server list, and they'll just go and play those. But
with the EULA, you were saying to get ideas, like for example, I don't even know if this is EULA compliant, but I'm just going to say this, like supply drops. When you buy it, it'll randomly teleport a box somewhere where people can get it. You would need a developer to develop that, and that would be investing in it. Rather, it's wouldn't it be, because the EULA isn't going to go after every single server until they're bigger, so wouldn't it be just a better idea to just not be EULA compliant originally, and then as your server expands, you'll be able to develop more things to make it EULA compliant?
the biggest thing with not being EULA compliant, and we were fortunate enough that when the EULA started to get enforced, we were 99% compliant. So when we didn't have to make changes in our community. So our community didn't have a sudden rebel and go, you've taken this out of kit PvP, you've ruined the server, it's the worst thing in the world. And that's the backlash that you're going to have. As that community grows, you're right, as a 10-player server, Mojang probably aren't going to find you. But if they did, and you suddenly stripped all of that gameplay mechanic out, then that's going to cause you a huge issue with your community, because everybody will want those features back. And if they don't get them, then they stop playing, and then your community goes. Which is why, even as a 10-player server, you have to be EULA compliant. It just makes the process easier.
To real quick go back to your second question, though, about plugins and having to invest in getting plugins done. There are a lot of places you can get public plugins other people have made that won't cost you anything or very much at all, which can be a really good place to start.
Yeah,
So.
Spigot Forums is really good. You can go on there and type like Egg
Like-
Wars like CubeCraft, and you can find it. It's
There
great.
is a supply drop plugin, just as an
Yeah.
example, on there. I think it's $5, which is a lot cheaper than paying someone to make it custom for you.
We'll go over to the other side to try and even it out a little bit.
What do you see as the future of CubeCraft, and where do you think the community is going?
I think the biggest thing that we've seen since we started growing was, rather than just being an English-based community, we now have a lot of languages, a lot of different languages, and we have, moderators that are in like every time zone, and that's a real big change from a small community where you might be UK-only players or 90% UK players, and then you've got like 90% UK staff, and that's a lot easier to manage. But then you suddenly start going through and you have hundreds of different languages being spoken. You've got communities that suddenly are based around a specific lobby in Skywars, which is hilarious, and you get things like that. I mean, I don't know where you guys think it's going to go.
Well, where I think it will go, or where I want it to go. Where I want it to go is I personally would like to make sure that everything that exists on it right now is as good as it possibly can be. And then once we have that as a perfect foundation to continue growing on, grow and be bigger, better, and potentially the biggest server. But, yeah.
Is that a good enough answer, or do you want to know more?
Yeah, and Luke, do you have any games you can tell us about?
Oh dear.
Well, he might, but he can't. Yeah, there'll be stuff soon, TM.
We're always
go back
working
over
on,
to
we're
the
always
other
working on new stuff, so.
Yeah.
How do you guys divide the task of creating new things for your servers in the sense of if someone comes up with the idea, do they have a team that works with them, or do they just have the task alone to do?
How would it work for you in a roaming community?
Well, for us, when people do have ideas, actually, how we base my community around is we have a rank system, and then our rank has what I call a derp project, where their job is to legitimately come up with something to better improve the community. So it's more like it's an initiative that we want in order to bolster our community, but it helps them get to the next level of what we do. And for them, they actually have the rank above them. One of their accountabilities is to find a buddy, if you will. Usually it's them, and they help them along creating their project. And then if other settler or free people, new people want to join on and come on, that's perfect. And we try to trust our people that they're going to build, whether it's an event, whether it's working with the server staff in itself to create something that's going to be based on what we want it to have happen. The most important part of it is that you should always have a backbone of someone supporting the person whose job is to do whatever they want to do. So,
for us, we tend to take ideas from the community. We go through our forums, we see what's popular, if there's a good poll on there for different ideas, which is good. A lot of people tend to tweet us ideas as well.
And we have a lot more ideas than we have time to make, so a lot of it is going through a list of potentially hundreds of ideas and figuring out which one we think is most beneficial in the short run and which one we should focus on. And then typically we will have a developer or two focus on making that. Depends on the scale of the project, how many people actually work on it. Then we have, if it's a game, we'll have builders contributing map, we have staff testing it. So it's a lot of people contribute and work on getting just one new game or idea out.
Yeah. And then if it's not perfect, it goes back to the beginning, and we have to start all over again.
Sweet. Thanks.
So I wanted to ask a question. So with YouTubers, kind of when you're first starting out, I know a good way of advertising is having a YouTuber kind of step on, and because they have maybe a large fan base, they bring in people. How would you find that YouTuber?
Well, I think for us, since we focus on creating unique content, new games such as Egg Wars and Tower Defense and stuff like that, the YouTubers find us because they find our content interesting and it creates good video content for them. It's hard to get in contact with a big 10 million subscriber YouTuber, but there's tons of YouTubers out there that have a couple hundred or a couple thousand who they might not pull 10,000 players to your server, but they're more than willing to talk to you and potentially come play on your server and help bring players in.
Yeah, and never underestimate the YouTubers that have, even me, I only have 400 subscribers on YouTube. Like, I'm tiny, but, if I play on a server that has 20 players, 1 or 2 people might see the video and think, yeah, I'll go and play on that, and that's 1 or 2 more people than you would have had.
And no matter what size you are, whether you're a 10-player server or a 20,000-player server, every player counts that joins your server.
Yeah.
And also, I wanted to ask, how do you have your donation pages? Because I know there's Engine and Minecraft. What would you prefer?
So the biggest thing with that as well, and it's a weird thing in the community of Minecraft, is that everybody calls it donations. It's not, it's a purchase. We're quite clear on that. We don't call it a donation, we call it purchases. They're customers, that's what a person is. And it's quite a clear distinction. You're not a charity, you are trying to create a product. We use Bycraft. We're good friends with the people over at Bycraft. They're really nice people, but
The big thing with Engine is that to use the Engine store, you have to use an Engine website. So we prefer Bycraft because it lets us use non-Engine stuff for our website and for our forums.
which becomes a big thing if you want to grow a community. You might not want to be locked in to a particular piece of software.
But we do leverage, my community does leverage Engine because, again, it's one of those is like, if you want easy tech and you want to leverage other people's stuff or their work and they're providing to you, you pay as a monthly fee, especially when you're starting out or you don't want to commit those resources, Engine and their, pay to support your website type thing and donation craft inside of Engine is the way to go.
Okay, sweet. Go back over.
Hello. Would you say coming to events like this help build a community? So coming to Minecraft, going to TwitchCon, Insomnia in the UK, if you were starting out small with 10 of your friends and you all went to an event wearing a t-shirt, etc., do you think that will help build a bit of recognition for it?
I think anything would help. I mean, people are going to see t-shirts. We come to events like this so that if there are community members, they can come and say hi. And it should be the same if you've got 200 players. If you're all UK based and you know they're going to Insomnia, then have a little bit of a meetup, get to see each other. Because it's really nice to see people offline rather than just speaking to them through a computer. I assume your community may have done similar meetups and do that. It's like we've got staff that we've met for the first time at this MineCon, and it's fantastic. I might not want to meet them again after this MineCon, but it's lovely to see them. And you go out and you have pizza, and it's lovely. But having that interaction in real life I prefer it than doing it all on the computer.
Meeting people in person helps build stronger connections than meeting them online. Definitely. So even if you're not necessarily bringing in new players, in your example of 10 friends getting together from their server, it'll help them bring them together and help make them a stronger community.
Just be careful if you're meeting people in real life.
Well,
though.
yeah, that
Especially
goes
if you're
without saying.
younger.
Yeah.
But also, that was a big thing, is like being able to find new people. I mean, this is the greatest pool of people who possibly are looking for new servers, who are looking for and just reaching out to them and giving them a flyer. And actually talking to them and getting is going to solidify that more. And that's just a promotional tip for everything, pretty much. But the big thing, be able to promote if you're a smaller server, is just getting out in your community itself, going to your school and just, giving people your IP or whatever and inviting them, it's free advertising that's much easier than going to the ubiquitous internet because, everyone's throwing money, more importantly money, and you might not have that money to compete. So utilizing and leveraging the offline pools of people that is probably one of the great way to start it off. So.
Cool.
I just wanted to say, I was thinking of an issue that I'm not sure if you covered there because I got here partway through, but I was thinking as you start to get a larger community, not necessarily on a server, not necessarily even in Minecraft, just in, I suppose, any community in general, that you're faced eventually as you get large enough with a sort of issue where that you want to keep the old players around, where you want to keep them entertained, you want to feel like they're useful, they want to feel like they're welcome there. Then you want to have the new players who come in there who want to feel like they're also welcome in there, and not those old players who are like basically the veterans there, that those people aren't too imposing there, that they can't make a living because those people are way ahead of them and they can't get there because, say, those people have like fully enchanted diamond armor and these people have like nothing. So like, how do you combat that?
Do you want to comment on that, Ethan?
That's a very hard thing to do. It's a tough balancing act. You obviously always want new players coming in to help, bring fresh blood in and grow the community, while not irritating and pissing off the existing players. With your example of someone having diamond armor versus someone not having it, one thing that can be beneficial is kind of having like starting areas on a server potentially where you can't have stuff like that. I ran a faction server once where we had that problem, and no one wanted to leave spawn when they were a new player because everyone was just camping it with diamond armor waiting to kill them. So we had a kind of starter world where diamond armor and above wasn't allowed. So new players could join there and kind of get into the community and get started. And once they had better armor, they could upgrade to the better world where they could play with the veteran players. Yeah. So it does depend on your community, and you gotta. You can always talk to them and figure out what solution they think will work best, because they know a lot more than people give them credit for a lot of the time.
Yeah.
I think allowing that progression, as you say, having starter areas and going through that is always a good thing. Because you're right, people get, especially on something like factions, you can allot a lot of resources, and then suddenly you can't be beaten, and that can be quite frustrating as a new player. We've had game-changing features have been added to games, and suddenly old people don't like it, but all of the new people love it, and trying to balance that a lot of the time can take hours and hours and hours of discussion to decide, do we reset stats? Do we not reset stats? Does it become a new game? Or it's a fine balance.
As far as I'm aware, that seems to be an issue that the, not to like break any copyright issues here, but the World of Warcraft community has been facing recently, that they're getting a whole lot of new expansions and stuff that new players are joining and stuff, but the old players are like, hey, remember this thing that I spent like 50 hours trying to get? Oh yeah. Wait, that's useless now.
Yeah. It's even the biggest people face it as an issue, so it's always going to be an issue within a community.
And I think another one with that real quick is that in the community itself, leveraging those veteran players to act as mentors to the newer players. If you have those, if they've been around for a long time, including them into larger having a say in the community's direction, like giving them the ability to play a larger role. As the framework itself will allow new people, they won't get bored because they're actively making a larger stake, because they have a larger stake into things, and new people will continue to go through the process, and everyone's happy.
Sweet. Last question, unless anyone has any others. We've got a few minutes left. So.
My question is kind of similar to what that one was. I'm part of a server which used to have thousands of players, but now it only has a few hundred, and that's mainly because the community has become insanely toxic, and it drives away almost every new player. So, do you have any ideas of how to fix that? Like, should we risk getting rid of the entire old community and start fresh, or just let it die out?
It's a tough one to try and deal with, a toxic community. Once that starts to take hold,
it's one of those things, how I saw it, because my community was on a server before this current server that we were on, and it was super toxic. They would get a lot of people, but there's a lot of bounce because of no one wants to be on the server. And so for me, my thing was to get involved in the server, and then bloodletting has to happen, sadly. In order to get rid of that, you kind of have to isolate those, give them this is the talk that we're going to have. I know you've been here for X amount of months / years, however long they were, and this is what's happening, and if you continue, you're going to have to leave, and you're going to have to sit there and first identify and look and see who are the issue, who are the big troublemakers, why are we losing so many people, and talk to them. And if they, because I have the ultimate donator rank. I've invested blah 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 into your server. And you're like, well, it's the way it is, and this is what's happening, and this is you need to find somewhere else to play.
Yeah.
And you got to do it sooner than later, otherwise stuff like that happens. Like the last server is no longer with us, so.
I think it's finding those people, as you say. You can say, oh, it's the whole community, but it won't be. There'll be 3 or 4 people, and it's those people that you want to try and have that chat with. And if they're being toxic to the community, if that's part of your rules, then they have to go. We've had people, and on a regular basis, have people in our community who have our top rank and they've purchased it, but if they break the rules and that's the process, then they get banned or kicked. And you have to apply those rules to everything, and that can really help. If they are breaking the rules, then it's an easy enough solution. But it's finding those key people that are being the toxic people that lead other people to be toxic. Because a lot of people will just follow along with things, even if it's not actually what they believe. It's a very easy mentality to get into.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
Try putting them on a server, all of them together, just by themselves. Oh, it's amazing. They just tear each
They'll
other
hate
apart.
not having
They
new
can't
people.
do it because there's no new people to scare off. So they're just like, well, if we're all going to be annoying, then no one's annoyed because everyone's annoying. Yeah.
About his question, the person before him, what some faction servers do, if you're talking about factions, to make sure there's not someone that's super OP and that has everything and that kills everyone else, I would recommend doing like a yearly reset or doing resets every once in a while. Thank you. Doing resets every once in a while, yearly or 5 months. I know that it'll make a lot of people irritated, but if you add new features, it'll also make a lot of people they won't realize that what you're trying to do is you're just trying to reset it and make it so that new players will be able to get a new start. Because, of course, there's, most servers, the veterans are on when there are 5 players on, not when there are 500.
Yep.
Where they don't have anyone to fight against. It's easy for them to just get really strong really easily because there's no one to compete with. So, and then when more people join, they just kill everyone else. So, I would recommend just resetting it every month, 5 months, year, I don't know.
Yeah, and we've done that. We've hidden it on updates and just wiped out stats. And again, if you know you're doing it every 6 months, let players know. Every 6 months we reset stats, and people, if there's a countdown and every month they know, they're usually fine with it. But that brings us up to 4:01, so we're 1 minute over. But it's okay. I don't think we'll die yet. Thank you, Jeff, Mac, Luke, and I've been John, but thank you for joining us, and we'll be outside if you have anything else.
Thank you for moderating.